So I'm going to be speaking with you on the evil that men do, psychoanalytic meditations on wickedness. My paper is relatively short, so it leaves a lot of time for discussion, which I want to have. Unfortunately, it feels to make the argument I wanted to make, I needed to write a kind of dense paper, although I try to make it as accessible as possible. So I need to read it, which I apologize ahead of time. I just couldn't find another way to present the sort of logic of it, but I will try to make it as readerly as I can. There's so much cruelty in the world, a middle-aged social worker said to me several years ago. Meanness always existed, she added, but it has reached unparalleled and intolerable levels. It is sickening and nearly unbearable. Many of us feel horrified and demoralized by the appalling things people do to each other every day in what I've unfortunately come to call our age of rage. From school shootings and church bombings to concert massacres and killings at protest marches. Neither Donald Trump nor foreign terrorists, in my opinion, caused this. A variety of historical, economic, political, and psychological forces have led to the uncivil war in the United States. But Trump, to me, has certainly both provoked and capitalized on economic inequality and financial hardship, mistrust and disillusionment, fear and loathing between citizens, political parties, genders, and races, which has only heightened the wickedness and animosity we all have to contend with. Evil simultaneously commands our attention and resists our comprehension. From a psychoanalytic perspective, the experience of evil is profoundly unsettling. Evil overwhelms us. The evildoer has brought the unthinkable, that which we can emotionally process, into daily life. And that's part of a contemporary psychoanalytic understanding of trauma, the unbelievable entering daily life. Evil shatters our basic trust in the safety and goodness of the world and leaves us stunned and sometimes speechless. Wickedness upsets our deeply programmed and unconscious Western view that the world, like our family, is safe and good. So we then may tend to deny it or push it away, rationalize it, or minimize it. You have trouble accepting that there's evil in the world, my second analyst said to me many years ago, referring to my own tendency to minimize the behavior of a psychopathic relative. I only later realized that he was unfortunately correct. But denying the existence of evil not only excuses it, it makes it more difficult to think clearly about its meaning, its source, and how to remedy it. Philosophers, theologians, dramatists, psychoanalysts, and political theorists have struggled to elucidate the nature of evil. We don't seem to hesitate to call certain people, acts, and events evil, as the philosopher Richard Bernstein notes, and I quote, genocides, massacres, torture, terrorist attacks, the infliction of gratuitous suffering, end of quote. But we seem to have trouble specifying what that means. The nature of evil seems to elude human comprehension and raise more questions than answers. Are wicked people born or made? Do they have evil seeds, or were they products of disturbed families or deprived socioeconomic life circumstances? Is evil a pre-existing metaphysical entity? In other words, did the, quote, devil make him do it, as some theologians and murderers steadfastly claim? How could a benevolent deity create a world permeated by what Shakespeare and Julius Caesar called, and this is where I got my title, the evil that men do? Does understanding the motives of evildoers mean one is condoning their behavior? Some years ago, I wrote a psychobiography of Trump, and it was on Psychology Today, and at that time, they allowed for dialogue. Now they don't because there was so much hostility, a product, I think, of this age of rage. and a psychologist wrote, Dr. Rubin should get his mind straight. Either Trump is bad or she split. You can elucidate the nature of something and empathize, and it doesn't mean you're morally condoning it. But she had trouble kind of, saying, so that's why I say, does understanding the motives mean one is condoning? No, it's just you're elucidating what it means to the person. Virginia Woolf aptly noted, an explanation blunts the sledgehammer force of the blow. In the face of evil, many people tend to rush to pat explanations and moralistic judgments. He's a born psychopath, sociopath, that may provide the illusion of clarity and understanding, and perhaps ward off fear and helplessness, confusion and sorrow, even as they demonize and render opaque the people they are pathologizing. Other people shrink in the face of wickedness. Susan Naiman, who wrote a history of philosophy, argues that evil, quote, defies human capacity for understanding. Evil is complex and, quote, resists and defies any final comprehension, Bernstein adds. There's no complete account of evil is, because we're constantly being confronted with unanticipated forms of brutal ethnic cleansing, militant religious fanaticism, terrorist attacks, and murderous varieties of nationalism, Bernstein concludes. But I wonder if calling evil inexplicable is a mystification, an apparent explanation that actually hinders efforts to understand what evil is, why people are wicked, and how to respond to it. And the central part of my paper is going to be this following. When we psychologically illuminate the emotional lives of evildoers, which psychoanalysis has the resources to do, even though it has tended to neglect the topic, understanding wickedness may become more possible. Comprehension of evil does not mean denying the outrageous. It means rather neither denying its existence nor submitting weakly to its weight, the philosopher and political theorist Hannah Arendt argued in Origins of Totalitarianism. Even though evil is emotionally and intellectually challenging, we can still enrich our understanding, and that can help us address it. I think there are a plurality of types of evils. When we look at how the word is used, and the philosopher Wittgenstein taught us to do this when he said the meaning of a word is its use in the language. When we look at how the word evil is used, rather than search for an essential or singular meaning, we can see that it functions in a variety of ways. We call evil that which we can't accept or find inexplicable and monstrous, such as the deliberate infliction of unbearable suffering on innocents, atomic bombs on civilians, putting people in gas chambers, or more recently, murdering women and children in the war between Israel and Hamas. Now, interestingly, the word evil is also used to silence thinking and demonize what we refuse to understand, as well as to register horror. Fanatical groups, for example, use the word evil to signify what they hate and want to obliterate. And this is the heart of my paper right here. Psychoanalysis, in my view, has at least a threefold contribution to make to the psychology of evil. Number one, psychoanalysis' empathic and contextual mode of listening and investigating can illuminate the intersubjective worlds in which evil grows. Psychoanalysis, number two, can elucidate the subjectivity of the murder or persecutor. In other words, the links between wickedness and a history of abuse or neglect. And three, psychoanalysis sheds light on some of the salient meanings and motives of evil for the perpetrator. Evil comes in many forms. There are people who commit diabolical acts who fear a threat to their existence, believing that, in the words of George Atwood, a person or group is absolutely dedicated to the destruction of what we most deeply love and cherish, ourselves, our children, our faith, our very worlds as ours to inhabit. He says this in The Power of Phenomenology, a book he co-wrote with Robert Stallero. Related to this are people who have been emotionally annihilated as children and harm other people as a way of tangibly leaving a trace of their own unwitnessed agony. And then there are others who feel endangered because of prior abuse and hurt other people before they can be re-traumatized. Still, other people were humiliated as children or adolescents and feel shame and resentment and attempt to punish other people for what they have undergone. And then I think there's certain extreme cases in which people have an envious hatred of the non-abused, which causes them to attempt to steal the innocence of the people they encounter, the way the evildoer was robbed and betrayed when he or she was young and defenseless. Because of time constraints, let's briefly consider two examples, just to ground what I'm saying a little bit more, so it moves from the theoretical to the experiential. David Lane and Donald Trump. My discussion will be necessarily focused and selective. David Lane, some of you may know, some of you may not. I did not know him till a patient was talking about him one day. David Lane was a notorious neo-Nazi and arguably one of the leading architects of the white supremacist movement in the 20th century. He was a member of the terrorist group, The Order, which was responsible for the assassination of the Jewish radio host Alan Berg, as well as many other crimes. And he illustrates most, if not all, of the motivations I just talked about. Not because some imagined devil made him do it, but because he'd been traumatized by a physically abusive and alcoholic father who beat his family with a razor strap and broke David's older brother's eardrum, leaving him deaf, and abandoned the family when David was 4. A few years later, David was adopted out of an orphanage by a doctrinaire fundamentalist Lutheran minister from the old school. This David Lane I'm talking about was obsessed with the extinction of the white race, and he was best known on the right for penning what's called 14 words, arguably the most renowned white supremacist slogan: "We must secure the existence of our people and our future for white children." Lane underwent something heinous and murderous. When your father physically abuses you and abandons you, it's natural to feel decimated and obliterated, worthless and unlovable. To make matters worse, he faced this alone, which only deepened the emotional destruction. In a misguided attempt at self-healing, he blamed the wrong people, blacks and immigrants, Jews and women, instead of his father and mother, which kept at bay the horrifying realization that his parents had decimated him. Now, other evildoers like Trump are encouraged directly by a parent to do atrocious things. Fred Trump Sr. told his son Donald, "You're a killer, you're a king, you're a killer, you're a king, you're a killer, you're a king," as Harry Hurt notes in Lost Tycoon, a biography of Trump. Trump's parents made him into the kind of person his father wished him to be, someone who thinks he's the center of the universe, lacks a moral compass and empathy for other people, is arrogant, deceptive, ruthless, manipulative, cruel, and sadistic. His father was myopically self-centered and mendacious, harsh, and critical. His mother was cold and emotionally detached. Trump was unloved and not empathized with or understood. Spoiled and emotionally neglected, Trump lacked basic emotional nourishment to thrive, which undermined his view of himself. He learned that the world was a scary and dangerous place and that he needed to demolish anticipated attacks before he was destroyed. It's not surprising then that he devotes his life to proving he's not an abject failure. His biggest nightmare is to feel he's a loser, the very phrase repeated endlessly at the dinner table about other people. He endlessly violates the rule of law, treats people as means to his self-glorifying ends, and tries to annihilate those who stand in his way. Evil, quote, seems to belong to another order than that of nature, French philosopher Luc Ferry writes in his otherwise illuminating A Brief History of Human Thought, a philosophical guide to living. And then he continues, Ferry continues, evil serves no purpose and is in most cases counterproductive, end of quote. That's not true from a psychoanalytic perspective. From a psychoanalytic perspective, we can elucidate and deepen our understanding of some of the emotional functions evil serves, and thus shed light on what Western literature depicted about evil, from the devil in the New Testament to Dante's Divine Comedy, to Shakespeare's Macbeth and Richard III, to Goethe's Faust, to Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, and the novels of Dostoevsky and Kafka. Not all traumatized children become authoritarian leaders or serial killers, terrorists, or sadistic figures, but all that I've studied were traumatized. From a psychoanalytic perspective, there are diverse paths to wickedness, but certain common ingredients. David Lane and Trump, like Hitler and Ted Bundy, were emotionally tortured by their parents, which was denied by people in their world. They were thus gaslighted. There was no home for their feelings, which went underground into their bodies and damaged their sense of self and sabotaged their relationships. And this is crucial to my own view of trauma. In a misguided quest for relief from agony and an attempt at self-healing, they eventually physically reenacted in the world what was emotionally done to them that they couldn't come to terms with or express. I think they had an unconscious hope of communicating the nightmare they underwent and receiving compassion and validation, and perhaps ultimately experiencing self-healing. When confronted with wickedness, an experience that some of us have and of which all of us are capable, according to Stoller and Atwood, we're faced with the question of what to do, as well as why it happened and what it means. And I'm moving towards a conclusion now. I take hints and gain emotional solace from Shakespeare and Melville. Shakespeare presented haunting portraits of evil characters, Richard III and Iago, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, and he dramatizes a view of wickedness that is, to me, more nuanced than the contemporary philosophical or psychological perspectives I have encountered. In reality, there is no eradicating evil tendencies, as Freud wrote in Thoughts for the Time on War and Death, which was written in 1915, dialogue, which was a wonderful dialogue. If you haven't looked at it, worth rereading if you have, with Einstein. And that was about 6 months after the outbreak of the First World War. One of the things I most admire about the depiction of evil in Macbeth is that Shakespeare does not fall victim to either illusory hopes or pessimistic disillusionment about eliminating wickedness. 4 of the main lessons for me from Macbeth are that A, evil is everywhere. B, we have to fight it. C, we won't eradicate it. And D, we have to contest it anyway. We have to keep trying. There's a scene in Moby Dick that may depict Melville's ultimate view of how to respond to wickedness. Bothered by the uproar in the waters below, Stubbs orders Fleece to address the sharks. Fleece's sermon provides an important clue to Melville, I think. Your voraciousness, fellow critters, I don't blame you so much for. Dat is nature and can't be helped. But to govern dat wicked spirit, dat is the point. You is shark, sartin, but if you govern the shark in you, why then you be angel, for all angel is nothing more than the shark well governed. The older I get, the more certain I am of this. We're all capable of almost anything, and we can always eliminate parts of ourselves that we dislike. But that doesn't absolve us of the imperative to try, even if that is, for most of us, a Sisyphean enterprise. The job of each of us, Melville tried to teach us in Moby Dick, is not to purge greed or wickedness, which may be impossible, but to govern the shark within. That's easier said than done because wicked people enjoy inflicting suffering and tend to not feel guilty or troubled by it, and thus have little motivation to change. So this was my old ending as of last night, and I was not I was comfortable with it, but I thought I need to try to go a little further because it's not going to give you any hope. So this is what I wrote last night and today. The roots of evil, in my experience, lie in childhood trauma, especially parental malattunement and the absence of an emotional home for the budding evildoer's challenging feelings. One of my favorite ideas from the wisest psychoanalyst I know, George Atwood, is the incomparable power of human understanding. I wonder what would happen if we all walked through the world with a renewed effort to deepen our own human understanding and emotional availability for the people we meet, especially the parents and kids and adults at risk. Might that create a substitute emotional home for them and give them a voice or a voice back? And might that help us make meaningful inroads into the crucial but never completed and urgent task of creating a more humane and less wicked world? Thank you.